This is a special workshop with the Reno City Council Redevelopment Agency, November 28th, 2 p.m. My clock's a little off. I'll have to adjust it. What'd you say? Texas time. All right. Madam Secretary, call the roll, please.
Breckus?
Here.
Zadra? Here. Delgado?
Here.
Dorch? Here. Jordan?
Here.
Cashel?
Here.
Dick Scott?
Here. Thank you.
Somebody woke him up. Mr. Dorch, lead us in the pledge, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have some public comments. Matt Polly.
Good afternoon, City Council, Mr. Klinger. Mr. Mayor, happy to see you back. We're happy you're out of the hospital and feeling much better.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Scott, thank you for being here. I'd like to start by saying, first of all, congratulations to the new City Council members. Way to go. We're proud to be a part of the team. So, first I'd like to start by saying that I love Reno and I love my community. I believe in Reno. I was born and raised in Las Vegas and was adopted truly when I came to the University of Nevada and studied social work. I was a professional social worker doing child protection for nearly 10 years for the county. I'm currently a small businessman downtown. I own Java Jungle and Jungle Vino. Again, I believe in this community. I love baseball. I love that we have the Aces, and congratulations to them for being essentially the world champions of minor league baseball here locally in our community. My concern moving forward, as I'm sure we all are, is really the fiscal impact on our government, and truly what the role of government plays when it comes to these types of endeavors. First of all, I'd like to say that I believe in redevelopment dollars and revitalizing communities that need to be where they need that assistance. In this particular case, if it's my understanding, we're looking to subsidize or help assist baseball by allocating about $1 million a year out of general fund. If we were a community that was flush, I would certainly be more open-minded to allocating those dollars. My concern is that we have social ills in our community that I believe would benefit greater from those allocated dollars. And I would challenge our community with the help of you folks, SK Baseball, community leaders, to really identify what those challenges are that really prevent our community from being the absolute best that it can be. I believe that baseball really can add and does add to our community, but what else needs to be put in place to really get us to that upper level of citizenry, so to speak? I believe it's critically important that we work with SK Baseball to do whatever we can to think outside the box, to be progressive when it comes to working a deal and in that negotiation. I'm committed to be supporting of you guys in whatever decisions that you come up with, and would offer my help to be of assistance in that process as well. Thank you very much for your service, and I'll look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much. Ted Lifter.
Thank you, Ted Levater. I just want to make a comment on the November 14th meeting where this deal was originally signed. I'd like to read the agenda item from that meeting. It was C4. It states staff report for possible action, discussion and direction to staff, and possible approval of limited guarantee pertaining to settlement and restructuring agreement. I believe this agenda item is a violation of Nevada revised statute regarding open meeting laws. specifically Nevada Revised Statute NRS 241.036C1, which states, which requires public body agendas to include the minimum at the following: an agenda consisting of a clear and complete statement of the topic scheduled to be considered during the meeting. I don't believe this agenda item met those requirements. I'm reading from the Nevada Open Meeting Law Manual, which was published in June of 2012. It states a public body's failure to adhere to agenda requirements will result in an open meeting law violation. If a matter is acted upon which is not clearly and completely described on the agenda, the action is void under NRS 241.036. I believe the action that was taken on November 14th is void because the agenda did not clearly state what was going to be discussed. Had the agenda clearly stated what was going to be discussed, I would have been here at that meeting to speak like I was at the 2 previous meetings. I'm going to leave for the record a copy of the open meeting law complaint form that I submitted to the State Attorney General on November 26th. I'm not sure what impact that's going to have at this time. It was my understanding that there was some concern that the team might be able to sue the city should we go back on that deal that we signed on November 14th. My hope is that this violation will undo what was done on that date and give you guys the opportunity to start negotiating with a fresh slate. I really hope you use that opportunity to address some of the real concerns we have in this town. I agree 100% with Matt Pauley that there are social ills in our community that are underserved, that we've cut funds from over the last 5 or 6 years. And I know there's a lot of talk about baseball being one of those elements to a community that can draw businesses to town. But I've seen study after study that suggests it's the education of our workforce that keeps businesses from moving here. Spending this $1 million a year on educating our children or helping lift people out of poverty, I think would be a much better way to create a sense of community. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank Partlow.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, first of all, to those of you who are new here, my congratulations. Those of you who are staying on, my condolences. The shirt I'm wearing signifies the AAA championship that Reno won on the baseball field in our behalf. That's 30 teams. But what you may not know, there's another 84 teams in the United States representing cities, large and small, which play minor league baseball. And what I'd like to suggest to you is the players and coaches and the on-team members did their job. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is tell you that it's a time for the rest of us to step up to the plate and do ours. I believe that a surcharge should be put on all tickets sold to the premium seats and the reserve seats, 6% for the premium seats, 3% for the reserve seats, no charge for the general admission seats. I think we ought to keep the kids and their parents coming and sitting out on the berm. It's a great feature of the ballpark. I've done some back-of-the-envelope calculations. There are people in this room, I'm certain, who can do very accurate ones on, first of all, what those surcharges would mean and what they would mean to the members of this community. But I come up with about $1.25 for people like me that have premium seats, which I've had as a season ticket holder. This is my 5th year. I'm incidentally, in full disclosure, a baseball nut and have been since 1947 when I started playing competitive baseball. I believe the reserve charge would amount to about 40 cents per seat. And I think that the proceeds of, and what I suggest next is that when we come up with that number, whatever that amount of money is going to be, that it be matched dollar for dollar by the city of Reno, by SK Baseball, and by Washoe County. And my back-of-the-envelope indications are that would amount to about $700,000 a year. I don't know what that does for you with your negotiations with the note holders, but what it does for me is it says, as with in this community, as with the United States of America, we have to start working together and stop pointing fingers at each other and start cooperating together to solve some of these issues. And unless we do that, we're not going to solve any of them, not the fiscal cliff, and we're not going to solve this baseball issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Guy Day. You take your time. Good.
Thank you. My name is Guy Day. I live at 1290 Autumn Hills, and I just have a few words in support of the baseball team. My family and I moved to Reno about 30 years ago. About 10 years ago, we went to a baseball game in Sacramento and watched River Cats. It was a tremendous experience. There were kids catching foul balls. There were people outside the right field fence having a free picnic. Everybody was having a great time. Excellent family entertainment. Reno Aces ballpark is patterned after the same model. There was one thing we didn't see at the Aces this year and at the games in Sacramento. There was no foul language like there is at UNR football games. There are no drunken brawls like there are at football games and stuff like that. Nothing to be ashamed of when you had your kids in tow because you knew they were going to have a great time. Now in Reno, it appears that we've got a lot of crawls going on. We've got the pub crawl. We've got the East 2nd Street crawl. We've got the zombie crawl. We've got a crawl for just about everything that means people can just go down the street and go from place to place, drink and have a good time. Not too much family entertainment, though, when you really stop and consider it. At Aces games, you'll see kids with baseball gloves trying to catch a foul ball or getting a high five from Archie. You don't worry about it. I mean, you don't worry about the language because there is no foul language. It's a great, fantastic family experience. Baseball and the Freight House District have brought employment to a dead area. It's a great stadium. It's a great product presented by a staff that wants your business, and they're very, very happy to see it come out. It's family entertainment in a friendly environment. I think losing AAA baseball, if this thing goes away, will be one of the biggest mistakes we can ever make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have any other public comment cards? Okay. Having no other public comment cards, I'm going to close the public comment section. There will be one at the end of the agenda. Now we'll go to item 4 on the agenda, presentation, discussion, possible direction to staff. What was that? Well, then come on up here. Huh? Oh, you want public comment, or you going to talk about the item?
I was going to talk about the item, same thing. The only one item on the list.
Okay, we've got a bunch for the item, okay.
You
All
want me to
right,
sit
no,
down?
no, let me,
Jim Galloway for the record, Mr. Mayor, welcome back. New council members, welcome to you, and remaining members, welcome back. I've been a season ticket holder for the Aces. I live down in the Palladio. I'm so grateful for what's happened in the area since I've moved downtown. We've improved a lot of things. One of my concerns is that the city of Reno, the Redevelopment Agency, gave its word. What was it, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we committed to SK Baseball? When I grew up in business and in life, your word was your bond. So I don't see how Reno can renege on a contract that they signed. I think if Reno backs out of this deal with SK Baseball, some terms may change, but our reputation around the country, why should anyone ever believe this? Why should anyone ever enter into another agreement with the city of Reno if their word cannot be trusted? I don't mind that the new members wanted to renew the terms of this program, but in no way do I want to be part of a city that reneges on its deal and doesn't keep its word. And if you members don't keep your word on this, how can I ever trust you? Thank you.
thank you very much. Let's hold the applause down and different things. Just slows the meeting down. Joe Tagley. Can you, I butchered it, Joe. I apologize, but I couldn't read it.
It's quite all right. Tag Lieber. Ladies and gentlemen, I come to you today as a lover of baseball. I grew up on it. I know the enrichment that it brings to a kid's life and also to the larger community as a whole. I think it's terrific that we have baseball here and that we have the stadium, and the ACE is a fantastic organization. I'm also coming to you today as a teacher, as an English teacher at Truckee Meadows Community College, and I can personally attest to the horrors of grammar and general basic grasps of writing that we have in our community, unfortunately, that is based in a system that does not adequately prepare them or hold them accountable to standards that they should. So using this and other things that I see in the classroom, you know, reflections of social ills that have been mentioned by other members here, you know, such as teen pregnancy, domestic violence, poverty, drug addiction, homelessness, all of these issues here in the city that we could be using our dollars to remedy instead of line the pockets of a few people, create a few jobs. You know, with the stadium that we have now, I think it's an interesting crossroads for the city to take a look at where we're spending our money and where we can best create the strongest community. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeff Peterson?
Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share. I've lived here in Reno for 30 years, raised my 4 kids here, and I'm an alumni of the University of Nevada, football alumni, so I'm not even that big of a baseball guy, so to speak. But one thing I do know is the company that I represent, Reality Engineering, relocated here 18 months ago. And from a business standpoint, we had a lot of choices as to where we were going to be. And we could have went to South Meadows and a lot of different areas, but we chose downtown. And the reason that we chose downtown is because of what it offered our employees, the panache, the renaissance, if you will, that was happening in downtown and really, you know, from an economic development standpoint across our whole city. And from where I stand and from my vantage point, the baseball stadium represents just that. It represents a comeback for Reno. It represents that renaissance that we're experiencing. And really to have it empty and to have baseball leave and have it just sit there would be very much the 3-step backwards after 1 step forward. And I just think it would just be an eyesore for the city.
Thank you very much. Craig Parrish?
I appreciate the opportunity to speak into this issue. I'm one of the pastors at Livingstone's Church, just a couple blocks from here on South Virginia and California Street. I'm also one of the recipients this year of the Reno's 20 under 40 along with Councilmember Delgado. And I don't say that as a self-praise, but I say that just to share my heart, my commitment to this city and really the revitalization and the growth that I've really personally witnessed over the last few years. Livingstone's, we used to be up in northwest Reno, and a couple of years ago we needed a new building and we could have gone anywhere in the city. And we chose specifically to come to the center of the city, to come to downtown in the Midtown area. And our heart with that, and part of the vision of the church, is to be in the city and for the city. So we found an old brick building, we gutted it, and now we're drawing 1,500 people every single Sunday down to the center of this city. And not only are we invested on Sundays, but we do a number of outreaches in the city. One of the things that we've done over the last few years that's really gaining traction is the Midtown Art Walk. And that's with Midtown, we work with about 30 other entrepreneurs, business leaders within that area. And this last July, we had 2,200 people come down and really see and witness for themselves some of the revitalization and the growth that is coming to this area. And those people, a lot of them that are coming are actually families. And that's where it ties into the baseball stadium. That the baseball stadium is a safe place to go. It's a safe place to bring families to the center of the city and for a family to participate in city life. No longer do they just have to stay in the suburbs, but it's a way for them to come down. And the stadium isn't just a stadium, but I think it's an idea. It's a symbol of the growth that we've been seeing over the last few years. And it's my fear that if we stop and we put a halt to that, then it takes down that idea. It's a backward step in the momentum that has really taken years to generate within that. And so as part of my work and effort in the city and the revitalization that I've seen, 3 things that I've noticed is that it takes risk. It takes risk to have a vision for a couple of years from now that people don't necessarily see today. It takes courage to stand behind that risk, to stand behind that vision. It takes commitment to really see that through. As we have committed as a church to the city, I'm asking that you guys also would stay committed to the revitalization of the city as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. John Sandy?
Mr. Mayor, City Council folks, congratulations. You know, I'm just really happy to be having this discussion here, and I respect so many people in this room, and no matter what, I think we all care about this city, and we're all going to help and do what we can to make it a successful place. I didn't really know how I was going to come up here and approach you, but I was thinking about it as I heard people talking. I grew up here. This was my home, and except for a brief stint away for school, this has always been my home. And there's one of my best friends in the crowd here who knew me back in college, and I think I was a walking, talking Reno City Chamber of Commerce. I always talked up the city and always bring my friends here, and I love the place. And a lot of them would ask me, you know, oh, wow, you're from Nevada, you're from Reno. What's it like with all the casinos? And I always remember telling them, you know, people always think of the city as downtown and casinos and everything. And I grew up in the city, and I can probably count on my hands the number of times I've actually been downtown. Looking back at that, it's kind of funny because now I work downtown. And the reason I work downtown and I'm there every day is because of the ballpark. We moved our office from West Liberty to across from the ballpark because of baseball and because we believed in what the city was doing with baseball. And, you know, people have asked me, because it was kind of a blighted area, what's it like working down there? And I can tell you from my experience that on game day, there's nothing like working downtown. The vibrance, the community, the spirit that's down there, it's a great thing. And I am proud of it, and I want to continue to see it continue and flourish, and hope to hopefully be a part of that so I can take my kids and watch the Aces win another championship. But, you know, and maybe it's because it's so close with the elections passing, but, you know, a number of you had ran on issues that I truly believed in, and I wrote some of them down. You know, reinvesting in our neighborhoods, preserving our quality of life, creating jobs, and improving our local economy. And I think that that ballpark does every single one of those. So I hope that we can keep it and move it forward, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. David Silverman?
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members, Mr. Klinger. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you about the Aces baseball stadium and the topic that's at hand here. I opened a business directly across from the stadium based on the commitments that were made to the SK folks, to the developers. I know it's a complex, complicated topic, but I would strongly encourage and ask that a decision be made to figure out how to make it work, not at any cost, but not fulfilling the obligation, as I've heard some other individuals say, is, I don't think, an option. I don't think that's the right thing to do, not just for me as a business owner that's directly in the shrapnel line, as I like to call it, if that bomb were to go off, but as a community member. Well, there is a lot of momentum that's developed, and the state of our economy in the last few years has not been what anyone would like it to be, but we have had some momentum builders and some things that moved us in the right direction, and the Aces Stadium, I think, has been one of those. It has attracted a lot of people. Some of the comments you've heard today, myself included, to do things, open businesses, to come downtown. I just heard John Sandy say about coming downtown as a kid. There weren't a lot of things to do, but now with the park, with the baseball stadium, with what's going on along the river, there are a lot of reasons to come downtown. I'd like to think that we can continue to figure out ways to do that. Again, it shouldn't be at any cost, but I hope that we're able to figure that out. I think a question is not necessarily can we afford to do this, but can we afford not to do it? And what are the consequences of not doing this? I think are great, and I would ask you to consider that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Partold?
Good afternoon, Council, Mr. Mayor. My name is Partols. I'm here representing Basin Street Properties. As many of you know, we bought our first building in downtown Reno in 2005 and moved our headquarters from the Bay Area in 2009. And since then, we've become the largest landlord downtown. We've invested over $100 million in office buildings downtown. And we feel like the stadium is critical to not only our success, but for the continued success of downtown. One of our buildings where David is a tenant is 300 East 2nd Street. When we bought the building, Harrah's was the major tenant, and as many of you know, they consolidated in their casino, and we were left with 70% occupancy, 70% vacancy, 30% occupancy. Since the baseball stadium located across from our building, we have gone to 85% occupancy. And I can tell you not everybody in the building is a baseball fan, but they believe in what downtown has done. They believe and put their money where their mouth is and to locate their business in a transitional area. And the environment that baseball has created has been a business-friendly environment. We also have a $25 million hotel that we have been working on for the last 3 years, and we're currently negotiating a term sheet with a local bank to build just east of the office building. This will produce $250,000 of property taxes, and when it's fully stabilized, $885,000 between room, sales, and property taxes per year. If the baseball team goes away, we will not build the hotel. I've looked at the deal from 10,000 feet, the original deal that was signed from baseball and the new deal that you're considering. And to not get in the weeds, I look at it this way. For $1 million a year, you get a personal guarantee from a wealthy man on the stadium who will personally guarantee the debt. You didn't have that before. He will guarantee that the baseball team stays here for 30 years. You didn't have that before. The UNR study shows a $21 million economic impact to downtown because of baseball, 300 to 400,000 people a year, and almost 400 jobs produced by baseball, the freight house, and the concessionaires. That all goes away. As David so eloquently said, I don't think you can not afford to do this deal. The Reno brand is fragile. It's getting better, but it remains fragile. Downtown redevelopment is getting better, but it remains fragile. I encourage you, strongly encourage you to support the ecosystem that you've created, that is continuing to evolve, and that will flourish if the city continues to support baseball and further development downtown. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jim Richards.
Mr. Mayor, Council. My wife and I moved here 25 years ago, and we've had season tickets to the ballpark since it opened. My question is to the council, to the previous council, did they have a contract with SK Baseball, or did they not? And if they did, can the new council immediately reject that contract? Is it legal? Does contract mean anything anymore? Thank you.
Thank you. John Oman, OHM.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members. Before you, hopefully you have it, it's in a little blue folder that was passed out. We'll just read along together. This is along the lines with Mr. Partlow's proposal. It's just there's some other aspects that perhaps Mr. Klinger might appreciate. There are a little bit of numbers. Anyway, it says, I've been following the Retain the Reno Aces stories with utmost interest, and I'm proposing an out-of-the-box solution for generating the $1 million per year that would presumably solve the problem. The primary beneficiaries of this, of retaining the team, are the fans. Shouldn't they be the ones to absorb the cost? Average attendance in the Aces 4 years is $434,000, although trending downward if you see the enclosed figures. If you took the required $1 million per annum, and as denoted by the agreement, and divide it by the average attendance figures, you have a cost of $2.30 per ticket, or $2.57 per ticket using last year's trending down figures. Just state on the ticket, Reno Aces retention fee. I'm sure that most of the fans would pay an extra $2.50 to keep their team in Reno. This type of funding's been done before. You did it with the Reno auto rental tax, if I recollect. This, and foremost, this would eliminate any possibility of a lower credit rating in the future, which I believe was the council's predominant concern in this matter. This could be proposed to the voters as Ms. Shivi suggested and preferred, at least as far as my opinion, solicit enough unique visitors to a website of fans only to vote on it, or the council could unilaterally, with consideration of time and cost of each method, propose or consider this thing as done. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All I have here is Rick. Rick? Okay. If I'd have read it, you didn't want to speak. Thank you, Rick. Sorry about that. Huh? We can do better things with our tax dollars besides playing ball. Larry Moore?
Thank you. My name's Larry Moore. I was born here. I'm season ticket holder all the way through. And the one matter I wanted to bring up is looking through this all. As SK Baseball and Nevada Properties first proposed, it was going to be like a three-part build-out. The stadium, then their little entertainment center, and then the commercial project that they proposed where the MISPA was going to be. And if you go back, even Manhattan Capital or SK Baseball's website, you can go back to articles in the Wall Street Journal and that show that was one of their main features, is adding this commercial area, which with the Simon Properties and them, they're proven best in the world. That was going to be, you know, the catalyst for this whole thing. And as I see, the real only plum Reno got out of this deal, you know, as far as day-to-day stuff, that would generate that. Now we think those people should come in, be able to follow up with their third part. Nobody's brought that up yet. But we haven't even heard plans or this or that. They haven't even striped the parking lot. I'm a big fan. I got good seats, and, you know, I've had them. I'll be here this year. But that being said, you know, that's one thing to consider. The other thing is I think nobody's thanked the Diamondbacks, you know, and Derek Hall and his Find a Way to Say Yes team, who came in here. And this is a hard place to play baseball, one of the hardest around, you know, because we could have the worst weather for baseball at any given game. That should be printed on the tickets, you know, and in fact, it risks the chance of players getting hurt. But the Diamondbacks, they adjusted stuff. They even brought pitching to the, you know, the batter-heavy Pacific Coast League, and they got us the championship here. And they don't make a peep, you know, and they're one of the biggest organizations around as baseball, as far as baseball goes. So I think we should, you know, address their thanks. And they're the ones that are actually going to get the team here. They bring the team. The team is all, the only thing that the stadium does is provide, you know, the venue and balls, I think, and the travel. But besides that, I think we should make sure everybody, before we come back to the table again, comes up to the board. You know, the fans have came up, the Diamondbacks came up, you guys have. But before we renegotiate, before we have this enormous nationwide deal as in the All-Star game, it's pretty big. If you look, you know, it goes back to teams have been doing it for lots and lots of years. We need to all get together and prepare for that. Even if it is our last year in baseball, let's go out with a bang. That's it.
Thank you very much.
And the thing you said about representing the people, you know, and how your vote would change, I think that's the smartest thing I've ever heard a politician say in forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bob Rusk?
Mayor and council, new council members, congratulations. Having served for 12 years in public office representing downtown Reno, all 12 years, Dick Scott can tell you this has got to be the toughest job you'll ever have. And you know what? It just got worse. So how can you go from there? Well, today you've got one of those tough decisions that you've got to make. It's not going to be made today, but you have to consider what's being said. And I can tell you that my involvement in downtown redevelopment started with the very first board. Bill Thornton, Don Carano, Co Swobe, and others, and I served on that board. And I've been involved with every successful venture in downtown Reno from that point on to this day. And I finally have achieved a status in life that I've always wanted. I'm a hay farmer in the valley to the south, and I feel good about that. In the meantime, I think in terms of AAA ballpark, of all the successes we've had in downtown Reno, is one of the most exciting that I've seen happen in this city. And I'm hopeful it'll still be here, that you can work out some details with the owners of that facility. I think there's some compromise that may be available. But good luck to you in that regard. And I can tell you from my experience, don't put it to the vote of the people, because I can tell you right now what the answers are going to be. You can save your time, your money. It's going to be no and heck no. So we understand that. But we elected you to make the decision, and we beg that you do that, because it's an important decision. And if you go along with my thinking, you'll make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman Pat Hickey.
Thank you, Mayor, and new members of the council. My name is Pat Hickey. I'm an assemblyman, parts of Reno, not the downtown area, although I once represented it. I just returned from an orientation of the new members of the Nevada legislature, and I want to commend the new members here. They're getting a little more of a grace period than I think you are to have to make tough decisions. But to the last speaker's point, and it's a message that the legislature should note as well, and that is you all, even though you're early in your term, are elected to make some difficult decisions. I applaud you for wanting to study this issue yourself and not simply let the previous decisions. I'm here and speaking in favor of it. I want you to know that. As someone who takes pleasure in bringing my 99-year-old father and my kids and hopefully grandkids, as my grandfather brought me. I grew up at the lake, and we used to go watch the Silver Sox at the old Moana Stadium. So I think it's been said, and you certainly understand the value to the community, and what a terrible loss if you don't find a way to salvage this, whatever the elements are. I'm not here to tell you what you should do, but I do hope with among the many I've heard today that you find a way to make this happen. It's a great addition to Reno. It makes us want to bring friends and visitors from outside to bring them downtown and enjoy what our city has become. So thank you for your work, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Damon O'Keefe. Damien, all right, Damien.
Hi, guys. A lot of what's been discussed so far is about all the great things that are going on with the city. The problem that some of us local businesses have are numerous. There are too many agreements made between the city and private organizations that aren't transparent. We got involved with this question about the ballpark years ago, when it actually was starting to build and build out. We couldn't find a lot of information other than what we were able to get from the Gazette, and as we all know, that's not much. We further investigated into what the county was willing to provide us as far as what properties were held by the regional redevelopment agency and what was held by SK Baseball. And miles and miles of paperwork and hours of internet searches and stuff, we came to the conclusion is that there are so many avenues that SK Baseball, Manhattan Capital, remember that one, Nevada Lands LLC, and Herbert Simons has within the city. It isn't just a matter of the baseball. It's the matter in which the business is being done in the name of baseball. Why are multimillionaires coming to the city of Reno and asking for a subsidy? That's the big question. Why? They own Meadowood Mall. They own the Reno Bighorns. They own the Freight House and a number of other commercial properties that haven't even been listed yet, that I haven't been able to find. They have an operating revenue of $4 million. That was the last input from Forbes magazine. If you don't believe me, look it up. Wall Street Journal wrote an article on Stuart Katzoff That is Manhattan Capital, which is the managing partner of Nevada Lands LLC. Nevada Lands LLC now owns more property in the state of Nevada than the state of Nevada owns. Now they have the same situation here in Reno. The problem with this is that there's too many tentacles that are attached to this ballpark. We need to find out from the council exactly what it is that we would lose if we lost the ballpark and what exactly it is that we gain if we keep the ballpark. Take your time, review it, and let us all know, not just the RGJ. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Katie Colling? You don't wish to speak? All right. Would be irresponsible to fund in any manner the ballpark. Please don't. Benjamin Castro? You don't wish to speak? He didn't write any comments. Randy Thompson?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. For the record, Randy Thompson, representing the National Federation of Independent Business. First, welcome to the new members of the council, and hi to the old ones. Nice to see you guys still here. As the mayor well knows, I don't take spending the public's money very lightly. I have been critical in the past of how our city has spent tax dollars. I am a fiscal conservative. But there are times when the government's funds can be used to allocate to a specific event like this that actually does stimulate funding. The $1 million, it's a great idea if we could actually allocate that money to help the homeless and educate. We just know that's not the reality of the budget process. You have $165 million in your city budget. This $1 million is going to perpetuate further funding, no doubt. The council did make a commitment. I'm not going to reiterate what David Silverman said, but essentially that is the commitment you've made to baseball, and thus the city has turned around and made a commitment to you. You've got a lot of businesses that have moved downtown that are making improvements, and to now lose that potential is a huge financial loss. I know the perception there is that the taxpayer is going to bail out a billionaire, and we don't like that perception. I think the challenge for you guys is to come up with a way, and I think some of the gentlemen have talked about a surcharge on the tickets. It should be more of a user-based fee than it is just tax dollars. I think there are ways, if you can, to find it more of a user-based system. But I think at this point, this is a good allocation of our dollars to perpetuate a part of the town that is coming back, and it is making Reno such a great place to be. I go to the games, not all the time. I'm not like Frank Partlow. But it is a great thing to have downtown, and it's gonna, and losing it now would definitely hurt that part of town so much, as well as hurt our overall image. There is competition out there for these teams. So again, I just say that this time, even though as a fiscal conservative, this is a good allocation because it's going to keep making more money in our town. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mike Alonso?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Mike Alonso, and I'm here on behalf of Monarch Casino and Resort and Peppermill Casinos, Inc. And we, to be clear, oppose the new transaction. And we support the Aces, like all the previous speakers. You can't say enough good about what baseball has done for Reno and what the Aces have done. But we just don't support the new deal and the general fund obligation to the city and the taxpayers. And we applaud the council for slowing this thing down and taking the time to look at this deal. This is a very complicated deal. And I don't know how many people here have actually looked at the details of this transaction, but it is very complicated. And I want to make it clear, speakers before me have gotten up and talked about the city dropping its commitment or not living up to its commitment. We're talking about two separate deals. The city has lived up to its commitment. The commitment they originally made with SK Baseball, they've lived up to. The issues, the economy, real property values, those kinds of things, everybody was affected by the bad economy. And that's what happened to that deal because it was based on tax increment. Property values plummeted, but they affected everybody. Everybody in this room got affected by the bad economy. And so the developer wants to redo the deal. But let's understand something, the city has lived up to its commitment. This is a brand new deal. And the developer has a commitment to this city under the original deal to stay here for 20 years. But they are using that to come up with this new deal. They're threatening to leave. So when we talk about commitments and whether people should keep their commitments, let's look at it both ways. I think people need to take the time, and I appreciate this council doing that, to look at the transaction and to look at the details of it, because it is complicated. Everybody's concerned about baseball leaving Reno. We're concerned about it too. It's an important asset to this community. But if you look at the agreements the settlement agreement, the restructuring agreement, there's a provision in there. If the city misses one payment over 30 years, the developer is completely released of all its obligations, including the obligation to stay in Reno. So let's assume that you agree to do this deal and you're committed for $1 million a year for 30 years, and you can't make that payment. You just don't have the money in the general fund to make that payment. The developer gets released of all its obligations. Everything reverts back for the city to the old deal. So the city's not released of its obligations, but the developer is. And I think those are things that everybody needs to look at, and I applaud you for taking the time to look at this deal and make the right decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sharon Honigbear.
Sharon Honig-Bear, and I'm here representing Historic Reno Preservation Society. And welcome to the new council members. I've been here before for the older members. I really am more raising a question than that I have a particular statement about the stadium. We are a great supporter of downtown Reno. We lead dozens and dozens of tours because we believe in Reno. We believe of our unique past, and we like to feel that we're building on that for our future. That said, I haven't been able, and we have questions as to where the real freight house stands in this package. We haven't been able to see or unpack that. The building was important enough to name new construction the Freight House District. How embarrassing would it be for Reno? Right now, the current Freight House, it seems to me, is undergoing demolition by neglect. It's just sitting there. If you asked some of us what our favorite building in Reno was, mine would be the Freight House. I've always just loved that building. It's been there since 1931. It's a package this is a town that began because of railroads. It was laid out in 1868 because of the railroad coming here. And we have a railroad terminal. We have what's now the men's club, but was an express building for freight, and we have the Freight House. I'd like to see that package intact. I don't know what the deal has for us, but it's important to us to preserve that building, and if there's a way, if it's not part of the package, to develop it anytime soon, we'd really like to see it broken out and allow someone else to come in and develop it. I know there are people and businesses that would be interested. So I just hope you can give fair consideration to this existing building. And if you know stuff that we don't know, we'd like to hear it. But I just want to bring that to your attention, that there are people who really care about the future of that particular piece of the puzzle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment cards? I have no other public. Anybody want to turn in a card right now? We'll be having public comment at the end of the presentation. You want to do it now? Come on. Then fill out a blue slip for me.
I will, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks.
Council members, thank you for letting me speak. I think there's a certain matter of trying to get a grip on what we actually have. We have one of the most beautiful stadiums in the United States, located right on the Truckee River. It's a diamond among stadiums throughout the country. We have it now. We have a national championship baseball team. We have recognition that goes far beyond the city of Reno. It goes to all throughout the country. But what I'd really like to say is we also have a relationship with Major League Baseball, with minor league baseball, with a man whom I've followed for many, many years and admire his family, Branch Rickey IV, who's in charge of minor league baseball and the president of PCL. We have a relationship with him. He's been part of this from the get-go. He knows that we made a commitment to PCL baseball. We made a commitment to our citizens. We made a commitment to the Diamondbacks. We even made a commitment in a, so to speak, to Major League Baseball because we're part of that. But we also have a commitment to our youth in the community. I go to a lot of baseball games. I go to UNR games. I go to high school games. I go to most of the games here at the stadium because I'm a season ticket holder. But there's a sense that I find myself in that it's sort of like an act of betrayal, that we would walk away from something and walk away from those relationships. Because I can tell you, knowing Branch Rickey IV, it'll be very, very difficult for us to ever obtain the confidence and the relationship that we have right now with Major League and minor league baseball. I hope that we'll put that into the hopper as we begin talking about our decision here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you'd fill out a blue slip. Sir? Yes, sir. Just over here, she's got one. Yes, sir? Come on. Anybody want to speak, get over and fill out a blue slip. I'm going to cut it off after this gentleman. Then we'll get the presentation. Then we'll open up public comment again. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor and
Identify
council
yourself
members.
for the record.
Helm Lehman. I write books on economics and public policy. Been in Reno about 5 years, and since coming to Reno, I've seen nothing but the downfall of the housing prices and the loss of revenue from the tax base, and the jobless rate of between now 11.5 and before 14.5%. But having that context set aside, if we look at the big picture, who really benefits most from AAA baseball? It's the Diamondbacks in this case, who are owning the Aces. Why aren't they putting skin in this game? One of the things I'm thinking about in terms of, we're talking about a choice between $1 million of revenue or raising ticket prices or having this team perhaps leave. One of the things that might be on the table are some out-of-the-box types of possibilities. For instance, maybe the Diamondbacks agree to a 2-game homestand against the Giants or the Colorado Rockies or another Major League Baseball team right here. Now, obviously, the capacity of the stadium is much less, but each game, if we were to charge $40 per ticket, and I know that's a lot, and a lot of people couldn't bring their kids to it, but it's a small price to pay to keep baseball here. Each game could generate, with concessions and $40 ticket prices, about $400,000. So you do that 2 times, it's $800,000. Now, the Diamondbacks would lose a little bit of money on that because they'd have some travel expenses, and of course they wouldn't have their 35,000, 40,000 people at their own stadium. But ultimately, they benefit from, again, AAA baseball and the fact that they are using the Aces as a training ground for their team. So that's one possibility. The other is, as other people have mentioned, raising ticket prices. And I think we can do a combination of things. And obviously, the council is going to be very creative, hopefully, in how they come about this. And it's not an either-or decision, but a combination of a lot of different possibilities. 2-game homestand, for example, which would really put Reno on the map because every sports page in the country would have the Diamondbacks against whoever they're playing, and would have the box scores and all that, and the location would say Reno. And if people really want to make that happen in Reno, known as a city that's beginning to grow up a little bit, that could be really helpful from a public relations standpoint. It would also help the council, I believe, in terms of political capital if we were to look at creative solutions and not just talk about $1 million, yes or no, but maybe we throw in a couple $100,000, okay? But we limit that to $200,000 or $300,000. We talk about ticket prices. We raise ticket prices maybe $1 a ticket. That raises another $250,000, $300,000. These are estimated figures, of course. And then again, if we could do a homestand thing with either 1 or 2 games, that raises considerably more money, which would not be an issue. And the other thing about the gentleman 2 or 3 speakers before, which really hit the mark, they're coming back right now. SK Sports is coming back asking for a new deal. So if we agree to this deal, what's going to prevent them from 5 years from now coming back and asking for another one? This happens all the time in every sports city across the country. And, the Economic American Enterprise Institute has looked at this in terms of public funding of sports arenas, and they found that their investment, if they subsidize a certain percent, usually about 20% or more of the cost of the ballpark, they don't get that return back. There's no return on investment in terms of increased taxes due to increased business around that stadium. So I just wanted to thank you very much.
Having no other public comment cards, I'm going to close the public comment section. Yes, sir, Mr. Dortch, and bring it back to the table.
Yeah,
Dortch.
Mr. Mayor, just as I have in the past, I need to disclose that I previously worked for SK Baseball and had a business relationship with SK Baseball. I don't have the full disclosure in front of me, but I've disclosed this prior at all of our other meetings. And I have no ongoing business relationship or anticipation of a future business relationship with SK Baseball. And after consulting with our attorneys and the Nevada Ethics Commission, I can vote on this matter. And I know we're not voting on anything today, but I can hear it and participate in discussion.
Right.
Anything I need to add to that, Jonathan? The full disclosure is on file with the clerk's office.
Yep, Councilman, we will make sure that that written disclosure gets filed in the minutes.
Okay. Any other disclosures, anybody, council, or anything? Okay. We're going to have staff presentation. Mr. Thomas.
For the record, council, mayor, and the board members, Bill Thomas, Assistant City Manager. We have a presentation that we're going to present to you, but before we do that, I did want to put this into context and talk about what we envisioned in terms of how this workshop went forward. You heard a lot of people talk about the deal and what is the deal, so we have a presentation that explains not only to you, but also to the public in the effort to be transparent, the elements and the terms of the agreement, or deal if you call it that, that we've been talking about. And we also have some history to give you context on how we got to the point we're at. And then lastly, we've got some information on, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? What are the costs or the ramifications of the different decisions, options that you have in front of you? So what we'll do is we'd like, if you would prefer, that we go ahead and make the presentation. Obviously, you can ask questions, but it might be better to run through everything and then have the questions based on the public comment as well as questions you may have. Jonathan's put together a pretty thorough description of the history and the elements and terms of the agreement. And we'd like to, if you're okay, just go ahead and get into that.
Okay. Let's go ahead and have the presentation. Make notes of any questions you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, I was walking early this morning and fell on some ice in front of a vacant house in my neighborhood and hit my head, and I may step out for a little bit and go put an ice pack on, and I think it's televised. I'll be watching it.
I don't.
Okay.
So bad. I don't blame you. I had my heart taken out. I'm glad the machine worked and I'm back. Let's go ahead. Yeah. Let's go ahead and have the presentation.
Yep.
Make notes of questions you might have as we go. You can ask them as you go, but unless y'all want to drag this thing out to about 10 or 11, make your question and then ask the questions as we go or when we wrap up. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Mayor and Council, for the record, John Shipman, Deputy City Attorney. I guess my task here today is to make a very complex and a broad deal, try to simplify it on a level that people can understand, and that so that council's coming from it from maybe a uniform, at least perspective about what the issues are and potentially where the issues are coming and where you can go. This deal's a complex deal. It's also one deal in the city, and we understand, staff understands that this is just one problem facing the council, a new council, and it has to be understood within the broader context. So we'll try to make sure that we get that point across as well. So the first slide, what we're looking at here, what this slide is basically a schematic of the different agreements to the original deal that was struck between the Redevelopment Agency and baseball. And it starts with the NRS 244A, which is the Car Tax Act. And that was essentially the enabling legislation that allowed the levying of the car tax for the purposes of building a baseball stadium. Now, if for council members who are here will remember, this happened in about 2007. There was a very short period of time where this money had to be either encumbered for the purposes that was discussed in the act, namely for a baseball stadium, or else it was going to go to other purposes. And so with that, they originally had a deal in Sparks, but then that deal fell apart, and then the city of Reno took the reins and went in and negotiated a deal and were able to present and get a deal approved by that October 1st deadline. So that, in essence, captured the car rental car tax for the baseball stadium project. The next item on there is the car tax agreement. This is the agreement between the county and the redevelopment agency and the developer, where the car tax would flow down to the project, and that car tax money would be bonded, and it was bonded, and there were two tranches, a Series A and a Series B. The Series A was sold publicly, raised about $20 million. The Series B was raised about $10 million, and that was purchased by Herb Simon, the developer. Then there were two disposition and development agreements. There was the stadium disposition and development agreement, which really dealt with the stadium being built and what had to happen there. And then there was the retail district disposition and development agreement. And that dealt with some ancillary development downtown, things like the bowling stadium, things like 427 Evans, things like the Freight House district. Below the thing marked, the slide marked Stadium Disposition and Development Agreement, we have a series of lease agreements, and I won't get into the details of those, but essentially the way the deal works is the stadium is owned by the redevelopment agency, and it's leased to the team. The Nevada Land still owns the land, and we being the agency, leases the land from Nevada Land. So that's kind of how that's structured currently. Below that, you'll see a reference to the payment agreement. And really, this is the mechanism that was put in place to reimburse the developer for costs for constructing the ball stadium and for some of the retail components. So we had the car tax money, and then also we had tax increment. And that was the vehicle to make those payments. Now, what happened, as we're all aware of, back in about 2008, 2009, property tax values and, macroeconomic issues impacted the city of Reno. Tax revenues and property taxes totally plummeted. So we were looking at a redevelopment agency at the time when this agreement was originally signed. It probably had a budget of $4 to $5 million. It had debt service payments of about $2.9 million. It had a staff of, I want to say, 10 people. And there was a belief that was, where that was the baseline. And from there, the base was going to grow from there. Well, then 2008, 2009 hit, and that totally obliterated the notion that we'd ever, have tax increment again, to the point where it's retreated down to about an $800,000 a year level, which is even below our debt service payment requirements for the agency senior debt of about $2.9 million. So, and that was, to be fair to all parties, that was something that nobody at the time the agreements were negotiated had any inkling of. It's probably easy to look back and say, we all sort of should have seen it coming with our houses and with our mortgages, but at that point in time, that was not on the radar screen, and that impacted the deal. So as a result of that, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but as a result of that, you take that element out, that tax increment out, and that leaves a big hole, a big financial hole in the project. And currently there's debt for the development of the stadium to the tune of about $55 million, and that's financed through Deutsche Bank, and that note is callable at the end of 2014. And that's what's prompted kind of this last round of how do we refinance this? How do we deal with the fact that tax increment is not performing? How do we keep baseball here? All of that's what has been really the driving force behind this last go around on the refinancing. So we talked kind of generally there what exists in terms of the existing deal. What we also have are the executed agreements. These are the agreements that were approved by council on the 7th and the 14th. So we have the settlement and restructuring agreement, which is, think of it as the master, refinancing agreement. We have a support payment agreement, which is an agreement which, implements the settlement and restructuring agreement to the extent that payments are made to refinance this $55 million debt. And then we have the limited guarantee pertaining to the settlement and restructuring agreement, and that is a document and a guarantee that if baseball were to ever leave the city of Reno for the next 30 years, the stadium would have to be paid off, and it would be owned by the city, the agency, the stadium authority, without any mortgage, and it would become our property free and clear at that point in time. Now, that's a lot of information. So what we're going to do is really kind of take that apart, the settlement and the restructuring agreement. And at this point, we want to look at, and I don't know if everybody's received okay, everybody has a document that kind of talks about some of the policy issues that are raised by the settlement and restructuring agreement. And what we're going to talk about is what the existing agreements say, and then what the refinancing agreement says, and compare and contrast those. Okay, so next steps on the refinance agreements, just for council's edification. Moving forward, the settlement agreements require approval of additional definitive agreements, and those have to be in place by January 13th or 31st, 2013. Those would include, the key ones would be the Stadium Authority Interlocal Agreement. That would be an agreement between the city and the county and the agency to set up a stadium authority that would become the hub for the baseball project on a moving forward basis. There's a management and operating agreement that would have to be negotiated between the developer, Nevada Land, SK Baseball, and the Stadium Authority that would serve as the vehicle to put the support payment, use the support payment monies to go to that, so then that money can be used to refinance the debt. There's going to have to be a trust agreement set up that's outside of the city and the county entirely, and that's essentially going to be a baseball responsibility, and that agreement's going to be used to sell and securitize the debt for the project. Again, the city is not a part of that. The agency is not a part of that. Just the support payments are part of that. The next deadline, and what the settlement agreement says is if these things aren't done by January 31st, 2013, then the agreement's over. That's a default. It's done, and we're back to where we are today. The next deadline in the settlement agreement is the appropriation of the support payment. And again, what do we mean by appropriation? Appropriation means that you have the ability to make the determination whether or not you want to fund that obligation. The way the settlement agreement is written, that's purely your legislative discretion. You can decide if you want to do that or if you don't want to do that, and the liability is limited based upon whatever your decision is. Based on that, for the appropriations, the first payment would be of $425,000 would be due on December 1st, 2013. The second payment would be of $425,000 would be due on June 1st, 2014. The next deadline or milestone in the refinancing would be the August 13th, 2014 date. That's the date at which the $55 million debt that's currently on the stadium becomes due. So under the settlement agreement, that would have to be refinanced by that period of time, or again, the agreement goes away and the obligations go away. Now, now I direct your attention to that sheet that we have, and just to talk through some of the policy issues, so we're all looking at the same kind of animal here. So the first real issue that we're talking about is and we've already talked about it briefly, is the stadium financing or refinancing. Under the existing agreements, the way it works is, we talked about that, tax increment was used to fund, the stadium acquisition and development costs. Tax increment has not materialized, is not going to materialize. That was, again, not due to anybody's fault either the city, the agency, or the developer. That's what happened. And as a result of that, the way the documents read under the current agreement, the developer is solely responsible for refinancing that $55 million debt. That's his obligation at this point. Under the restructuring agreement, the way that what was being asked is, hey, look, I've got this $55 million that I need to refinance. This thing happened where we lost the ability to get tax increment. Can we do a deal where we essentially split the refinance, where it's going to cost about, they're going to need about $3 million a year debt service payments to service that debt, that $55 million refinance. So the notion was, and it was proposed, that the city, the county would bear half of that, or about a $1.5 million between the two. And the developer, through things like a lease payment, baseball subsidy payment, which is essentially just a straight subsidy, a ticket tax. Some of the commenters spoke about a ticket tax, taxing the users of the stadium, and proceeds derived from sales tax increment from the TID that they have there. And bottom line, that money, on the developer side, that money would be pooled, the $1.5 million. The city, county money would be pooled. That would be put into a basket. That basket would be used to service a refinance debt of about $55 million. If there were shortfalls in that, on any one of those revenue streams, if, for instance, if the ticket tax didn't produce, or if the lease agreement didn't produce, or the subsidy, that would be on the developer side to fill that hole. That wouldn't be on the city side. The city's financial commitment under the restructuring agreements is, at this point, $1 million a year over 30 years. And the way that's structured is in the earlier years, you're looking at about $850,000, I believe, for the first 2 years. Then that escalates up to like $950,000. Then it goes up to $1 million, $1.1 million, and then it does that for a couple of years, and then it comes back to $1 million for the vast majority of the years. So the notion is it's $30 million over 30 years with this payment schedule that changes the payments around a little bit. But so anyway, that's the basics of the stadium refinancing. City, county, you pay for half. We'll pay for half. We still have skin in the game to the tune of $1.5 million. If there's additional costs, we have to eat those. City, county, if you could help out with the other half, that would be great. The next policy issue for the body to consider is the annual support payment. As we talked about, under the existing deal, that's totally and only limited to tax increment. The agency had that obligation. The city did not have that obligation. Under the proposed restructuring agreement, that would be a city general fund obligation. As part of that, as part of that, to the extent that the way the agreement is written, if the agency does start producing tax increment, you can swap out the general fund obligation with the tax increment that's created. So you have the ability to, offset your general fund or your general fund contribution by tax increment to the extent that that exists. But that's really, maybe a point of philosophy that people have to wrestle with. Is this deal going to be solely tax increment? Is this going to be general fund? And that's for you to decide. Team commitment. There was a discussion of team commitment. Under the existing agreements, or the original agreements, they had a 15-year commitment where if the team can be required to move if they move for any reason within the first 15 years, they had to pay off the stadium, give us the stadium free and clear. After 15 years, they potentially could move because there's a rule, and what the agreement said is the team commitment is going to be subject to baseball rules. And baseball can make a determination at some point that says, hey, Reno, we've looked at your market, you're not producing, for the sake of baseball, we need you to move this to another market. And so, potentially there's a scenario where the team has to move, not because the team wants to move, but because the league wants to move. Under the deal that we currently have, or if they were to move, after that 15 years, that's not a default. so it doesn't trigger any of the defaults in the existing agreement. Now, the problem that we have is that there's a risk that the team may, for business reasons, default under our existing agency agreements and relocate to another market. And that's basically the problem is, as we've talked about, there's this $55 million debt, and they've got to refinance it at this point. So at some point, they may make a decision and say, hey, we can't do it, we want to go somewhere else, cut our losses. And that's a risk. And, you know, and as far as staff is concerned, we don't have any insight into that, whether that's going to happen or whether that's not going to happen, but that clearly is a risk under the existing deal. If that were to happen, you know, when we talk about the economic impacts, the UNR study that was recently conducted indicates that the region, if they were to move, would be losing about 677 direct employees, jobs, 27 indirect employee jobs, 34 induced employees, and about 21.1 million in total economic impact. So that's the scenario if baseball were to leave, and that's kind of the biggest concern that staff has. Under the restructured agreements, the way it works is that the team is committed to remain in Reno for 30 years, period. And there's a limited guarantee, as we talked about, and what that document says is if they leave, they have to give us the stadium. And I have to make the point, under the existing agreements, if the team were to leave, we would get the stadium, but the developer would still have a right to be reimbursed for money that he spent developing that stadium. So there's really two scenarios where they give us the stadium free and clear, then he's entitled to a right to reimbursement. And I'll talk about this later. There's a slide on this. And secondly, if it's given to us not free and clear, like for instance, if there's a mortgage on it, then that's another consideration we have. We'll potentially own a stadium, but it'll have a mortgage on it that potentially could be foreclosed upon, or the stadium could be put in receivership. So, and that's kind of an unknown at this point, how that's going. I mean, if the team were to leave, what would result there, if anything? So that's the team commitment. And again, if the restructuring were in place, the notion is the city and the region would retain those jobs that we talked about earlier. Another big issue for the council and for the public is the credit risk. Under the existing agreements, there is no credit risk to the city. It's essentially all on the agency. The agency is its own legal entity. It got its own financial problems, but there is no credit risk to the city. To the extent that we go forward with the restructuring deal and providing the $1 million a year for the next 30 years, if we were to at some point later renege on that, we have potential concerns that the markets might look at that as, the city not doing a good job of managing its finances and then lowering its credit rating, which means it's more costly to borrow money to do projects later on. So that's definitely a concern. The budget impact, that's another concern for the council to look at. If under the existing agency agreements, there is no money that's going to the developer. It won't impact the city's budget. Under the restructured agreements, yes, there will be up to $1 million that'll go to the developer, and that's $1 million that can't go to other programs or to other purposes. So we understand that. Ownership of the stadium and the land under the stadium. Under the current deal, the agency owns the stadium for 20 years, leases it to Nevada Land. Nevada Land owns the land under the stadium, and then after 20 years is up, Nevada Land essentially gets the stadium for $1 at that point in time. Under the refinance deal, the stadium will be owned by the Stadium Authority, the agency, the city, whoever it needs to be owned by, and it will be owned immediately by them. And in the event the team were to leave, it would remain and it would be unencumbered by a mortgage. So that's another difference between what the current deal is and what the restructured deal is that there wouldn't be any right of reimbursement under the agency agreements or under the agreements that we currently have, or that under the restructuring agreements, but we would have that under the current agreements. Outstanding claims. Another thing that the restructuring agreement does is it looks at Under the current set of agreements, the developer has some legal claims relating to tax increment accounting and distribution, and that goes back to this tax increment dispute that we had with the county and we had with other taxing agencies about how money was being distributed. They potentially have some claims related to that maybe money wasn't received or wasn't allocated properly. They have claims potentially to the first floor of the NBS, the National Bowling Stadium, they have a development right there, and then we've talked about the RTC City Center. There's potentially an option right on that. Under the restructuring deal, what happens is that as soon as the city makes its first payment, support payment, then all of those claims are forever discharged. So regardless of whether or not we pay for 1 year or 30 years, all of those claims are immediately discharged, and they could not come back and raise those claims at a later date. Next issue is the fire station loan. That is an obligation of the agency. It took out a loan to the tune of $6.6 million to move the fire stations currently where the stadium is located. That has about 6 years left to be paid out, so it should be paid off in 2018 if payments are continually made. Under the restructured agreement, the loan will be forgiven after 10 years. And then as payments are made every year, $400,000 of that will be credited towards reducing the principal on the fire station loan. So, so again, if you were to terminate or stop making payments in year 5, you would still have, $2 million credit towards the fire station loan. Right now, the current amount outstanding on that is $3.9 million, and the annual interest is about $100,000 a year on that. And then finally, then there are the unknown costs and risks, and those are things we just want to point out that, we don't have a handle on and we can't get a handle on. There are things like litigation costs, if this goes to litigation, things like, maintenance costs for the stadium, if the stadium is empty, maybe something similar to like Moana, what happens there? We have this asset, but that's probably going to need to be secured. It's probably going to need to be maintained on a certain level. Costs, if the team leaves to attract a new team, the city's reputational, some speakers talk about this, reputational cost, in terms of opportunity cost moving forward. And then reimbursement of construction costs, where is that going to come from and how is that going to, payments to the developer going to be made on that? And then ultimately the potential loss or ownership of the stadium, if there is a foreclosure. Those are things that we don't know and we can't tell you right now because we don't have facts on the ground, to say here's the risk and here's, is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? But we need to point those out because those are other things that are potentially out there. So I think with the refinanced agreement on some of those unknown costs and risks, some of those become more controllable, so like there would be substantially less likelihood that there's going to be litigation with the developer if we enter into this deal. So, so with that said, those are about 9 issues that are put out there for your consideration in terms of, making decisions on how you want to move forward and what you want to do. The question always comes up, what happens under the current deal if the developer were to walk and the team were to leave? And the way the deal is written right now, if the team relocates within 20 years, then the agency can re-enter and take possession of the property, the stadium, and all the improvements on that. We have a right of reversion, but that's, again, subordinate to any mortgage liens on the property, and there's about a $25 million lien on that property currently, and that lien is in place to secure the $55 million debt. So that's the point of that lien. If they were to leave, Nevada Land is required to discharge that entire amount, that $25 million on the stadium and the property. And if that debt is discharged, what the agreements say is Nevada Land is entitled to a right of reimbursement. So if we were to take that asset and get another team or do something with it and money was generated, then that money would have to go to, kind of in the first instance, to pay off the development costs to date. And we don't have a firm number about what that is. It's something, but we're thinking it's probably in the neighborhood of $20 million or something like that. So that gives you some idea of what happens under the current agreements if if there is a default. So with that, that's kind of the presentation. We're open for any questions, any discussion.
Mr. Thomas.
Just one, again, for the record, Bill Thomas, Assistant City Manager. One additional comment I wanted to make, which is really what we're looking for from the staff, is any direction after today's discussion that the council would give us in terms of where we go from here. As Jonathan pointed out, we still have subsequent agreements that need to be completed to fulfill the ones that have been executed as far as the new and restructured agreement. So if we did nothing, those will still come forward to you. But what we're really looking for is their direction from the council on what we should do with this issue. Not asking you to make a particular decision today, just what areas should we explore further? What areas should we delve into more? What kinds of information do you think are going to be helpful to you in making a decision? So that's what we're asking for from you today.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
First question. Actually, I have two questions to start. The question I have right here is, given the fact that the refinancing isn't coming to its deadline until late, 2014, why the need to push this right now?
We were told when the last round of negotiations occurred, they have to plan a season ahead. I mean, so there's essentially 14 months between now and the time that note comes due. So, I mean, they're pretty much committed because of things like the All-Star game and whatnot to playing ball this season. But the question was, what happens after that? And that was what was really pushing that deadline. So you had that, and then you had, I think partially the new council coming in to the extent that, you had people who knew the deal from the beginning, and it's a real complicated deal, and then new council coming in, so there was going to be an education component of that. So those were a couple of issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you said, under that same breath, you said that, however, under the current agreement, they are committed here for 20 years, with the exception of leaving for business reasons. Can you define business reasons?
Well, when I say business reasons, it's more of it would be baseball deciding, look, this isn't penciling. We can't continue to make our debt. We're going to cut our losses. Maybe we're going to sell the team. Maybe we're going to, move to another, get another venue or get another market to buy us out, or give us a deal here so that then we can chip away at our debt, or figure out a way to how to kind of cut losses. That's not within our control. We don't know what the probability is or the possibility of that is. But that's what I meant by business reasons.
The league my understanding is the league could declare it economically unfeasible to be here and stuff, and that would work with baseball and stuff like that.
Which they would still have the option to do that regardless of what we may or may not
exactly.
come to an agreement on.
Then we had that slide that talked about what happens if they were to default. That slide would trigger. So that's what you would be seeing. You'd be seeing, okay, so then what are they going to do? Are they going to give us the stadium free and clear? Are they going to sue us? Are they going to, bankrupt the LLC and walk away? Those are the types of things that we don't know. And until we have facts, we can't really know how to respond to that, so.
Okay. And the last one I have right at the moment is, at the beginning of your presentation, you said that the limited guarantee was executed.
Yes.
With the reconsideration, can you give us a legal opinion on whether or not that was in fact?
Well, as we've given we've given advice to the council in the form of a memo. I'm a little reluctant to go into what that advice is on the record, because potentially that involves litigation. What I can say is, going back to the slide that talked about kind of deadlines and deliverables over the next year, there are outs in that agreement. Things like if definitive documents are not approved on time, within a deadline, then essentially when you default that document, what happens is it goes back to exactly where we are today. If the appropriations are not made, same thing. The agreements it's over, and we're back to where we are today. Does that help?
That deadline is January?
Well, for the deadline, January 31st, 2013 for these secondary agreements that would implement the settlement.
Thank you.
So just to follow up on that,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, but the last action of this council was to deny the limited guarantee. I mean, so it should not be executed because.
But it was executed.
But the last
Because
action.
we voted on it when the old council was here to execute immediately, and that's what I did.
But again, the last action of this council was to deny that limited guarantee.
That's correct, right.
Okay. Ms. Brackus?
Mayor, is anyone here from baseball today? Will we be,
Huh?
we be hearing from anyone from the base?
Not today.
They're not represented here today?
No.
Okay. Jonathan, I have a few questions. First of all, just kind of big up there, view. Is the deal that is proposed more complex or less complex than the existing, or is it a washout, do you think?
I would say it's probably less complex in the
Okay.
sense of, I mean, it's a more, I would call it maybe a more standard deal of this sort, where you have a stadium authority and you have, you basically have $1 million going in one direction, and then that's it. Yeah, I mean, just in general, I think it's about a little
Okay.
easier.
But conceptually, it pulls out a lot of the original concepts that were desired related to ancillary parcels and, revitalization objectives. So that's cleaned out, that public policy purpose is gone, but we have a cleaner deal. But we also have a binding of the council going 30 years out, which can be changed by any council, and not annually. So there's more risk on that side.
Correct. It's an annual appropriation. You decide every year whether or not you want to, whether or not you want to make that appropriation, if it's worth what you're
Okay,
paying
and
for
then
it.
in this kind of scheme of all these issues out there, I see analysis that shows that the ACE's attendance has dropped every year and by more than the league as a whole. So is that indicative of maybe the business decision scenario being maybe weighing beyond, all these others, and that they may make that decision and whatever agreement we're under, they may move away?
Yeah. I mean, let's take that as an example. Let's say under the refinance agreement, they started losing attendance, 3-5 years from now. They decide that, city's been making payments. They decide it's not financially viable, they leave. All right, under the refinance agreement, the way that works is the city gets the stadium free and clear at that time, period. With no mortgage, it's our asset to do with whatever we want to. And then the support payment requirement is terminated at that point in time. And that's under the guarantee that was approved or executed on the 14th. So in that way, it's a little cleaner than the current deal with this right of reimbursement, and how is that going to be figured out?
But has there been any work in rethinking this deal of going back to kind of a market analysis to understand really, is this a going concern here? I mean, you heard a lot early on, baseball, the city won't support baseball and this town won't support baseball. They're here, it's leveling off, the economy hit, but has any study in this renegotiation look at just the market dynamics of baseball support in the community?
I'm not aware of any studies done other than the UNR study, which really looked at the broader economic impact. I mean, that's certainly something that could be done. I mean, and that's potentially what, is in your purview today. Say, hey, maybe that's what we need to look at, So can staff do that? I'd defer to staff, and I don't know if staff has any other comments on that.
And I think the economic conditions have caused the attendance to be down a little bit.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Because we're a smaller market? Okay.
Yeah.
Mayor, if
Go
I may
ahead.
continue, I have some other questions about, since we've come on, we've been having some briefings on the city's overall financial condition and our overall debt obligations. And I'm trying to get a handle on what those are. I know some are in good shape, some are in not so good shape, you know, different revenue sources, just a lot. I guess $40 million a year in debt obligations are what we have. And I think there's some time-sensitive things coming up, maybe first part of the 2 quarters of next year. And I'm just wondering the standing of those debt obligations in relationship to this debt obligation if we make this condition. And I know we're not in a situation where we have to line up, you know, creditors or something like that, but I'm just wondering, how would this play out?
Right. I think Robert Chisel, the finance director, could talk specifically to, you know, particular items in the portfolio. The only minor correction I'd make is the restructuring agreement isn't debt per se. I mean, I think it's good shorthand, but it's a contractual obligation. I just want to make that point. So if
Robert Chisel, Finance Director for City of Reno. The answer really is that we cannot impair any of the pledged revenues for any of our bonds. Our bonds that have pledged revenues will be first and foremost. None of these revenue streams are, we're utilizing general fund. They're not pledged to the bonds. And where general fund revenues are pledged to revenues, they would be first and foremost. So they would, just like any other operating cost, would come after those pledged revenues.
So we don't have any general revenue fund obligations to any bonds right now?
Well, yes, we do, but they are general fund dollars, and they come first and foremost. And then after we pay those payments of those general fund obligations, whether, for instance, this building is a general fund obligation, the bond on it, or any of our C-tax revenues, they get their dollars first, and after those dollars are spent, it goes for the general operation of the city from the general fund, which this would be on pair with, whether it's the police department, fire department, finance department, would all be at the same pair level of standing in the revenues.
Do we have any of those obligations that are not making it that we'll have to look at in the next 6 months?
As far as the general fund obligations, we're in good shape with our general fund obligations. The ones where we have consideration to take into account are those revenue bonds that have select revenues coming into them, whether it be room tax or the sales tax for the retract bonds that have some that are not coming in as projected.
Could any of those be backstopped by the general revenue fund? Would that be a point?
If the council chose to change them from a revenue bond into a general obligation bond, yes, they could. Currently, they are only pledged with, their revenue bonds are pledged with the dedicated revenue. There are some that are pledged with the C-tax, which is the sales tax, which goes to the general fund. And so those could be utilized, you know, we could convert those into a general obligation bond and change the nature of them. But at this time, they are with the pledged revenues.
Thank you.
What kind of revenue do you think that, say, if they built a new hotel, would that bring in, and with St. Mary's going private, wouldn't they bring in extra money that maybe we wouldn't have to go to the general fund?
St. Mary's is in the process of appealing their tax appraised value. So any number I come up with is going to be speculative.
No, but I mean, once it goes private, because the company
they have gone
private.
private as of July 1st. It is estimated about $100,000 will be generated from Dignity Health, St. Mary's Dignity Health, which way you want to say it, in business license fees, and probably a couple $100,000 in property tax fees. As far as the hotel, I have not seen the numbers on the prospectus of what the hotel, the size, the expected room occupancies are to be, so I wouldn't speculate. I'd probably use the numbers that were presented earlier.
Right, okay. Other questions right now?
Yeah, could you reiterate again with regards to the
microphone, please.
It's on.
Is it on?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not close enough to it. With regards to the fire station loan, how much of the fire station payments get credited towards the loan now?
Let me, maybe I don't understand your question. So, under the refinance deal or under?
The current agreement.
Under the current agreement, the city has paid, I think, 1 year of fire station loan on behalf of the agency. So that got full credit for this $750,000, is that correct? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
Robert Chisel again. For this year, we are using general fund to make the fire station loan. The payments are quarterly payments of $150,000 principal plus interest, which is approximately $20,000. It is tied to the LIBOR, which is a fairly low rate right now. So, you know, it's variable rate. So approximately $150,000 is principal, $20,000 interest, and that will be for this year. We've made one payment for the first quarter of the year, and we'll, at the end of this month, next January, we'll be making the second quarterly payment. And it goes to right now the principal balance is approximately $3.9 million on the fire station relocation loan.
And I hope I'm not hogging all the
Well,
question
we're going
time.
to let you, and then if you start hogging, I'll gavel you down.
Okay, thank you. With regards, I'm just trying to get a better grasp on the current agreement versus the proposed restructuring agreement, so that we can give everybody a little bit of direction here, or at least some ideas of where we're headed. I love some of the creative ideas that have come forward today. I think that's what it's going to take. With regards, though, to the settlement and restructuring agreement, it was said that if we choose to not appropriate for reasons of we can't, or we choose not to, under the restructuring agreement, not the current agreement, the restructuring one, it would say basically if we are a day late or $1 short, all deals are off, and any monies that we can allocate won't go towards the fire station loan?
So the way the restructuring agreement works is you make an annual support payment of $1 million. Of that, $400,000 of that will be credited towards the payoff of the fire station loan on a yearly basis. So, you know, year one, year two. If you were to stop payments in year 3, for instance, you would have had 3 years of $400,000 per year allocated to the fire station loan to pay down the $3.9 million or $1.2 million. If you were to make the payments for the full 10 years, then the entire fire station loan obligation is extinguished and it goes away. And that's different from how it is today, because today the city's making that payment on behalf of the agency, so it's just a one-to-one. So, you know, for every, as Mr. Chisel talked about, there's a principal payment and then there's an interest payment. So the principal goes down based upon how much you pay. So does that answer?
Why only $400,000 towards the $750?
I think that was negotiated at the time because we were looking at, you know, the current length of the loan, and again, it was part of a bigger package deal. I think maybe getting more to the point, that is certainly something that we could go back to the developer or to, you know, and make changes or request changes in how the deal is being done.
Yeah, and again,
Yeah.
being new, we have lots of questions, and
Yes.
And thank you for answering those, and that is definitely something that I have concern.
Do you have something, sir?
For the record, Pete Wallace, City Manager's Office. Originally, Council had directed staff to renegotiate the fire relocation loan into the proposed refinancing documents with a 10-year term. With the outstanding principal of about $3.9 million at 10 years, it worked out to approximately $400,000 a year. But like Mr.
And
Shepard
I
said,
haven't-
that figure
I
can
haven't,
be renegotiated.
How many copies you bring? Okay. I haven't pushed it with them, but I have discussed it with them, and there seems to be a little wiggle room on reducing that so that the credit goes forward so we don't have that.
Just doing some, you know, and I am certainly no financial wizard, but just doing some math, it just didn't seem to pencil out quite right. Another question I have, and this is, I don't know if we can get staff or somebody, I don't know if who may have done the study. Who, with regards to the study from the university, what multiplier was used with these figures?
Again, Pete Wallace for the record. We'd have to confirm with the university to see how that figure was was
Oh.
come up with.
Okay.
In my understanding, EDON has had the university doing a study now that we should have the first part of the week.
Okay.
Ms. Adrup.
Robert, probably you. Talk about projections, please, both historical as well as future review of property reassessed values and the hit that we've taken in the last 4 years, 5 years that baseball's been with us, on property tax values that have gone in for reevaluation and declined. What kind of a hit have we experienced in the 2 redevelopment districts, downtown in particular?
Robert Chisel, both the RDAs are essentially below their base, which for the RDA 1, which is the largest and most discussed one, goes back to 1986. If it wasn't for the unsecured and other properties, we would be, and with the settlement we reached with the county, we would have no RDA 1 revenue coming in right now. So I think that probably gives you an idea where we are with the property values.
But
Now,
what kind of decrease are we currently experiencing because of property tax decreases that have been secured to date in the last 5 years? What kind of decreases are we experiencing in our revenue?
Well, for a while, again, depending on, percentage-wise, some of them were double-digit decreases. Some years were 10 to 15% declines across the city. In the RDA, because the increment is the first thing to go, it's kind of the anomaly of how it decreases. It takes the whole hit in the decrease in the property values in the RDA district. So the RDA absorbs the entire decrease. So the percentage has actually been, if you looked at how much the RDA lost in property tax over the last, 4 or 5 years, it's pretty much 100% of its property tax for the RDA. But if you look at it, the base is at $285 million. You're looking at a different percentage. So I don't want to mislead with percentages here. Speak more in true dollars. We've lost, we were up to $4 or $5 million a year in RDA revenue from property tax increment. We are essentially at this point getting $400,000 a year in property tax increment for this tax year.
And what do the projections look like? Projecting out
well,
both
looking,
property and sales tax, and I know that this is kind of a new area.
Yeah.
That city has not done this historically.
Well, as far as property taxes, citywide, we were looking at this fiscal year, looking at a 4.5% decline. We just talked with the assessor actually today, and this is very preliminary, so I'll probably get in trouble for even saying anything. But his preliminary numbers, he's going to get them more formal in probably the coming months, is looking at next year as being flat. Now, he hasn't broken it down by RDA versus City of Reno versus City of Sparks, but he believes across the board it is looking at it is essentially flat from this year as far as the property tax. And that's what we had projected in our revenue projections as when we prepared the budgets last year, was a 4.5% decline this year, flat next year. And I don't remember what we had projected for the following year out. I believe it was about a 2% increase in 2015 then.
And you've only gone to 2015?
At this time, we have only gone out to 2015. Now, with sales tax, we're projecting, it looks like this year, knock on wood, we're having a 3 to 4% increase in C-tax, sales tax coming up this year. Everything is very volatile at this point of the economy, so it's very touchy to say, and I always hate to project at this time, but probably 2 to 4% for next year would be a reasonable number.
And then tell me how, and I don't know if this is you or Jonathan, tell me in the restructured deal that's proposed currently, how the ARPA, the $1 million a year ARPA, would be impacted with those same kinds of projections. So it also is $1 million a year, and we're talking about $1 million a year in addition for
Right.
the restructured. How does that play out?
So again, the ARPA for people, that's the amended restated payment agreement, and that's the agreement that the agency has with the developer to provide tax increment to reimburse for stadium development costs. And the way that agreement works is that there's what we call a waterfall. As tax increment comes into the agency, it goes down a waterfall and drops in different buckets. So the first thing that gets paid out is the senior debt, and that's the $2.9 million worth of senior debt. After that, under the ARPA, baseball gets what's known as TIG, the tax increment growth that is within the baseball district that is actually realized. And that's based upon, when the deal was done, there was a base year, and it was 2007, and that year has subsequently been adjusted. But there's a snapshot in time, and whatever that tax increment was at that point in time, any tax increment above that in the district that was created would be paid to the developer as a result of the project, with the notion being that the project actually created that tax increment growth. After that money gets paid, then the fire station loan gets paid. And again, I defer to Peter Wallish or Robert Chisel on, the amount that gets paid from tax increment growth. After that, there's what's known as the operating costs for the city. There's a carve out under the original ARPA that the city could, or the agency could fund $3.2 million worth of operating costs before a penny would have to go towards that $1 million obligation for baseball. That has subsequently been amended to, I think it's about $400,000, $800,000, and it's kind of limited in what that money can go, as far as operating can go towards. After that's done, then we talk about the TIG subsidy. And that's the difference between, so for instance, in the baseball district, if $200,000 was created in a year, the ARPA says we will pay the developer the difference between that $200,000 and $1 million in tax increment. Okay, so, but we only have to pay that if there is tax increment left over after all these carve-outs. And then and what has happened, and what happened very early on, is that, 2008, you take a hit. 2009, boom. As Mr. Chisel indicated, the RDA takes a disproportionate hit because it doesn't include the base for all the properties. So I think we made one payment to the tune of about $237,000 in the first year, and that was TIG subsidy. That wasn't TIG, because at this point, the property values in the sub-district have declined at such a rate that they're below. So, so on paper, the way it works now is on paper we have an obligation to pay up to $1 million. But again, on paper, that obligation to pay is only to the extent that we have tax increment to pay it. And to the extent that we don't pay it, it rolls over year to year. There's no interest on that, and it'll roll over until essentially the RDA expires, and at which point that debt is extinguished.
And understand that, and
Okay.
I think that the new council members do as well.
Okay.
What I'm trying to get a picture, if you could help illustrate for us, is let's say that by 14, this would be a dream, but let's say by 14, we're operating at revenues of 2008. What would we then be responsible for? We'd have to recover the 5 years that we had not been able to meet that ARPA payment first, correct?
Well,
And,
yeah, I mean,
and in addition to that, we would also be making the $1 million. They would perform and proceed independent of each other.
I think the way I'm visualizing that is, if we had the 2008, a good 2008 banner year again, I think we'd still only be making, at the end of the day, enough to make debt service, our senior debt service, about that $2.9 million. And if we made that, I would be surprised if we could, A, that there would be any TIG, and then B, that whatever amount is there wouldn't be eaten up by the fire station relocation loan obligation before we even got to the $1 million payment. Does that make sense? So even if we go back in a time machine for a couple of years and we get, tax increment comes back and rebounds, we'd still have to pay the senior debt. We'd still have to pay the fire station loan. And maybe what you're saying, and maybe I'm understanding your question now a little better, is that every year that obligation rolls over and it increases by $1 million. So yes, to the extent that there were increment there after payment of all those superior obligations, then that would be obligated to pay down that amount. So if it's $3 million and we had an extra $1 million in ending fund balance, then yes, that $1 million would go to the pay down of that $3 million, and we'd still owe $2 million, and the next year we'd get another $1 million. So does that?
And in addition to that, we would still have this restructured loan obligation of $1 million.
But
No, that's different. No, what the restructuring agreement does is it entirely supplants the current agency agreement. So the ARPA goes away for the duration that the refinance agreement is in place. So as long as you're making that $1 million payment per year, then this money doesn't accumulate. It does to a certain extent. I mean, $400,000 of it gets credited towards the fire station loan. $600,000 of it, in the event we stop payment, then that $600,000 that would be credited for that fiscal year towards that ARPA payment. So we would only have $400,000 rollover potentially, rather than the full $1 million rollover. But again,
For 30 years.
For 30 years, but again, that payment would only occur in the event that we have tax increment at some point in the future to pay it. So it becomes almost, it's a paper loss, clearly, but I mean, as a scenario, it really only becomes critical to the extent that we believe there's going to be tax increment in the future. And the difficulty we have there is that we have this $2.9 million debt. We have this great devaluing. The state legislature put a cap on the ability for property taxes to rise, and it's set at about 8%. And that's, so short of there being new construction, that's the utmost that district is going to recover on a year-to-year basis. The utmost, I mean, that's if we could get 8% per year, that's huge. But so to the extent that we don't get that, I mean, if we're at a $400,000 level right now, I mean, you do the math, it's going to take well beyond the expiration of the district to get back up to where we were back in 2007, 2008.
But the $4 million we owe them right now under the new agreement, they're discharging that.
Understand. But there's been no, or has there been, state it in the positive, has there been any expression on their part to take this $1 million or $750 or $850, whatever it is that we agree to, and apply that entirely against the fire obligation?
I've had conversations with them about it. I haven't negotiated it, but as we come up, it was indicated they would be flexible on that.
And at our last meeting, I did quick calculations based on the ticket sales, and a couple of other of the people who spoke during public comment were talking about the same thing. Call it a ticket tax or just their rate. They don't have to go to the legislature for what they charge on their tickets. It was about 62 cents that they would need to tack on to a ticket to accomplish what they're asking from us. Any appetite to apply some kind of leverage on the ticket price or tax against this request?
I think that's something clearly we can ask for consideration of.
At the last legislature, baseball went to the legislature, and the legislature agreed that they could add $2 to the tax. And they're planning on doing that to help pay the $1 million or whatever they have for debt.
But is it a correct understanding that the tax does have to be approved by the legislature, but what they actually charge for the entry fee does not? If they currently charge $9 for a general admission, and I'm sorry, I don't know what it is, but if they currently charge $7 for a general admission, could they take it to $9 without having to go to the legislature?
And I'll answer in a couple parts. As far as the ticket tax goes, the Stadium Authority, which is newly constituted body has got to vote and approve on the ticket tax. And the city has members on there, the county has members on there, SK Baseball has members on there. And there's a set limit, I want to say like 11%, that they can levy a tax up to 11%, and it's like a self-tax, like you're talking about. So yes, there's that mechanism, and under the refinancing agreement, it contemplates and requires them to do that, and then to take that revenue and apply it towards the refinance of the $55 million. So then as to your second question, could they just raise their prices unilaterally and then use that money to, certainly, they certainly could do that. And that is something that when we talk about like the baseball subsidy piece, I mean, essentially that's what they're doing. I mean, if they start losing people, I mean, and they have to raise ticket prices to meet that $1.5 million per year, they certainly are going to do that. We can have discussions with them to see if they want to do that up front, certainly, if that's kind of the direction where you're going. But I guess the point, though, is that the ticket tax is required to be levied under the refinance agreement, and it's required to be used for purposes of refinancing under the revised deal.
And fundamentally, from their operations, have they expressed to you why it's okay to have a $2 ticket tax increase? So it's still a $2, as much as $2, that could be added to the price that someone's asked to take out of their wallet when they're purchasing that ticket. Does it matter if it's called a tax or would they just charge for the entry fee? Why the resistance? I'm trying to understand their resistance. Have you had?
I haven't seen a resistance. I mean, I think, and as the agreement shows, I mean, they're up for levying it, and it's going to be put in the bucket to do the refinance. As far as just raising their ticket prices,
correct. That's right.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any push on that. I mean, that's a difficult thing because you raise prices, fewer people show up, fewer concessions are sold. I mean, so that's a very, I can understand, and I'm not advocating for or against, but I can understand their concern, you know, whatever that number is. If they raise it too much, then maybe families are going to be priced out from coming, you know, or, but I think your point is, let's have that conversation, and that's a fair point. I mean, I haven't been a party to that conversation.
Thank you.
Any other questions right now? Let me,
Two more quick questions.
just a minute until I look down here a little bit. And
Oh,
then
sorry.
Okay, anything? Okay, all right, now.
Sorry about that. With regards to the current deal, the current financing is based upon the stadium.
The current financing is based upon the
The
stadium.
current agreement is based upon the $55 million is on the stadium.
Correct. It's
Okay.
the stadium. It's the stadium and the the stadium footprint, which includes that $55 million. Probably includes the restaurants as well as potentially the team. So what we understand is probably about $28 million of that is really kind of stadium development costs, and the balance is probably restaurant development costs, is probably team acquisition costs, but that gets tied back into the notion of, well, the city is only going to be paying for half of that debt, and that half of that debt is going to be the $28 million that represents the stadium acquisition costs. So does that make sense?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It does. I guess my question is with regards to the proposed deal, that kind of rolls in all of the freight house.
They have to
for-
refinance the entire nut, which includes the freight house and includes whatever else they want. And out of that, I think we're of the opinion that about 28 million of that represents, you know, the balance due, owing on the stadium when it was originally developed. So, and then you tie that back to what the city's contribution is.
Okay, but at the end of the 30 years, we would get the stadium, not
get the stadium.
not the freight house.
Not the freight house, no.
And Mr. Mayor, if I might jump in and just maybe to clarify this a little bit, that if the city approved the new agreement, if you will, the $1 million a year payment does not refinance $55 million. It only refinances, you know, $20 to $25 million, depending on the cost of money when you go to market. So, I mean, I think that's the important point to make here is the city's contribution would not refinance the $55 million. There are other pieces that go into this, including baseball's contribution.
And they have to, essentially, they have to put up a like amount. They have to put up 1.5 or 2, depending upon how the county, I mean, that's the calculus. You need $3 million a year. The city's potentially, willing to go 1 or whatever, or not. But that would be how that was derived.
And in the discussions that you have with them or will have with them, I guess at the end of the day, whatever we can work out, what if the county doesn't, I know this is very crystal ball-ish, but what if the county, I know they've asked them for $500,000 a year, what if the county says, does that mean all of our work in negotiation went away?
The way the agreement's currently written is that it's going to be an option to baseball to determine, okay, so if the city comes up with that and says we're in, and we're in for $1 million, and they go to the county and they ask for $500,000, and the county says no, well, then they've got a business decision to make. The same one is like, okay, we've got $1 million, that's not going to refinance the entire debt. If we still got a problem, so what can we do? Is that going to be enough? And if the answer is that's enough, then, then they will go forward with just the city deal. If the answer is no, then under the current refinance agreement, they can say, thank you, but we can't do this, and we're not going to move forward. And you don't have to appropriate money, and we're just basically where we are currently today under the existing agreements.
Why does the developer's obligation, never mind.
Ms. Brackus.
Jonathan, I, about 6 weeks ago, had a late lunch on a weekday at Slice, Mr. Silverman's restaurant, and I was talking to his bartender, and he said the restaurant across the street next to the stadium is only open like 3 days a week, and I'm just wondering, why isn't that restaurant performing? I also know under, kind of one of the bright signs of our economic situation here is that sales tax is, a bright sign is eating and dining in particularly our urban core. And these guys are restaurateurs, right?
Yes.
And so
yes.
what, were they owner operators, or have they given an explanation why that restaurant's not working? And what is their commitment? Obviously, we don't want to structure a deal that's more complex and have them open and operate a restaurant. But I'm just wondering, one, why that restaurant's not working for them, and what do they propose, or what do they give as an explanation?
I don't think there's been like pointed conversations about that. I mean, I think, and it would be speculating on my part, but I mean, the hours of operations are tied to, the people that they get in there that need the service, and then they can justify it on the basis of the,
And I think they're
hiring people.
operating 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And I know hotel casinos that are in this town that are closing their restaurants for 2 days a week. So it's all based on economy.
And that point is well taken. I do understand that. I'm just wondering, are they owners and operators?
Yes,
They
yeah.
own and operate, okay.
And we can have those conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's direction, we can have those conversations.
This deal is so complex, and I really would like the backstory and how we got here, because I just, it seems like really a deal of the times, like a Wall Street, you read about.
Right.
And so, I'd hate to go there a little bit further. And I'm wondering if other subsidy deals get this complex with these waterfalls and, scenarios. I mean, it's really out there. And I guess, but, I'll leave that aside, is Ms. Honig-Bear talked about the Freight House. And that is a pretty incredible building. And downtown's come back, based upon restoring old properties, which are more expensive than going ground up, but, very critical to your urban fabric. And we own that building, right? And then did
No,
we
we don't.
sell it?
No.
We never owned it, okay.
No, we did own it. We owned it for, for a time with the initial deal. That came with the retract properties, and that was used, and this gets into the history, into the weeds, and I apologize, but there was a tri-party agreement, property exchange agreement, and they were able to assemble the stadium property from that. So, and as part of that, and as part of what baseball has always shown, and everything, is that that's slated to be developed, and that was the next phase to be developed. It was first the restaurants out in front, then it was the freight house, then it was some of the, some of those empty lots that you see. And again, the explanation has always been, we got stuck with the economy. It's just we don't have the money to build that currently, and we're just trying to keep the operation
Their
going.
desire at one time, Mr. Katzoff owned several El Molinos restaurants. In Las Vegas, it's a #1 Italian restaurant, in New York City, Chicago, different things. They plan to refurbish that building and put an El Molino, I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure, Italian restaurant in there. But then the economy changed, and I still think that. The property across the street, they bought several pieces of that property. They had the whole block optioned to buy, and then the worm turned, and if it wasn't for the worm turning, we wouldn't be having this conversation because we'd be meeting our obligations.
But, so they're relieved of this duty of the freight house, right, now?
Well, the way and now we're talking about the sales tax increment agreements. The way it works is they get reimbursement from that for costs to acquire and build that. If they don't build, they're not getting reimbursement for it because you need a retail, it's based on sales tax, so you need a sales component to make that reimbursement. So it's kind of a no harm, no foul right now in the sense that they're not creating sales tax increment and they're not building so that they need it.
But they're not incentivized, and it's not.
They're
terms.
incentivized. They're incentivized.
Incentivized, yeah, to some
They are
degree.
incentivized. I would say they are incentivized to the extent that if they thought they could do the development, then they would be entitled to the sales tax increment. And I think it's the full boat. And that's just shorthand for like 65%. They get the largest portion of that. So if they can take that amount of money and put it into their pro forma and then the project works, I think they would go forward with the project. What I think we're seeing now potentially is that amount of money is not going to be enough to justify the broader expense in the operation.
Well, just as a general comment, I see people all over this town taking down old buildings and doing adaptive reuse and working very hard to lease them up. And, a side situation of this deal is they're sitting on a lot of downtown land, which who knows what they'll do. Right. We've got, she's mentioned a demolition by neglect, and so I'm just trying to figure out how that piece will play out. Release it to will they release it to the marketplace and let people, partner with them? Are they the right people to do it? Are they that invested to do these sort of things for our community?
I think that's a great conversation to have with them. In terms of where are they on their development plan, what's standing in their way, what do they need? Are they open to, maybe some out-of-the-box solutions, with this historic property or not? That's definitely a conversation that can take place.
They've been very flexible in looking at that, and they would do it. But they'd have no intentions of touching the outside of the building or destroying that. They intend to remodel the inside and put a restaurant. At least that's what it was when they optioned all the land. And they were going to build some townhouses and things, but when the economy turned, hell, I would have gotten out of the stock market if I'd known it was going to turn like it is. I had to call Walmart and see if I could get my old greeter's job back. Other questions? Any suggestions, discussion with staff about what you want them to look at or do? Or I think you've given them some direction. And
how did the discussions happen with the Katzoffs and Herb, and by whom?
They intend to come and visit with each one of you, and they just didn't come today because they didn't want to feel this was a workshop, and they didn't want people to think that they were doing something. That's why other council of the old council wanted to come and listen, but they decided they shouldn't because they didn't want to interfere with this new council. And I will be advising Mr. Katzoff and for them to come visit with each and every one of you.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'd like to push a lot of conversations to the dais as just a matter of practice that we do here. So I would like, rather than to meet with them individually, which I do not object to, but for them to have the opportunity to have these questions so the public can also hear. I think the comment about that agenda item was questionable. I looked on the agenda and I didn't see that either. I think there is strong public interest. And so, and I guess we have a complaint to deal with too on how we advertise that item. So I'd like to see more of the discussion at the dais on these sort of things because there is a lot of complexity and it informs the public on what we're looking at. So that would be my preference going forward.
Any other discussion or questions you want to bring up right now? Yes.
I know the SK baseball isn't here, but maybe this is a question that Mr. Chisel can help me with. Can you tell me, is the stadium profitable? And I don't know if you know that or...
Robert Chisel, I did have an opportunity to look at their audited financial statements. Right now, the stadium with the debt and its operation is losing approximately $1 million a year.
It's losing $1 million a
Yes.
year?
And I'm not sure they want that public, but I'm a public official, it's out there.
Question comes up, you got to answer it.
Yep.
As a follow-up to that, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, Robert, do we know, is that standard in AAA?
You know, a lot of what is driving it is their debt. Their outstanding debt, the $55 million, which is understandable. I don't know what the standard is throughout the country. To be honest, most stadiums throughout the country are publicly financed, so I think, you know, the operation itself is sound, and so I think across the country, most AAA and major leagues are sound. It's the stadium where the public financing comes in.
And this is probably more Jonathan. In reference to many of the questions, you said, you know, that was modified, that was modified, that was modified. How many deals, how many different deal points and improvements for Nevada Land have we issued?
How many?
Base years? All,
over the
you
course
add
of
'em all
5
up.
years, or?
Yeah.
Well, we have, many of these agreements have been amended 2-3 times. I would just say as an observation, I don't think it was all for Nevada Land. I think it was, I mean, a lot of those amendments, you know, fix things for both.
Did we ever initiate any of them? Did we go to Nevada Land and request a single modification
Not that
after
I'm
the
aware
original
of.
deal?
Not that I'm aware
I
of.
thought we went to them on the bus terminal
On the bus terminal.
because of the sewer tax and different things. But I'm not, you know.
That was part of like the second amended, the second amendment DDA. So, I mean, I think it's a fair comment. I don't think the city or the agency has gone to them and approached them about, you know, changing the agreement. I think when there was a request for change, and there have been numerous ones, there's been horse trading that's going on. So, you know, so they would need X. Okay, well, we need Y. And so that's what you see in a lot of these. So like in the RTC Center, under the original deal, we had an obligation to give it to them, free and clear. That became a problem, you know, and
No, I don't think.
because of the ARPA. You know, there's a lot of history there in terms of the financing and the mechanism, but what was negotiated ultimately was they kept a development right. Now, to exercise that right, rather than getting the property free and clear, they would have to pay $6.6 million for that property. So that's an instance of, you know, we didn't request that amendment to be made, but when the request for the amendment with the ARPA was made, we requested that the obligation relative to the RTC City Center site be modified so that it didn't have to be given to them, but rather they'd have to purchase it for $6.6 million. So that's the type of horse trading that went on, but you're right. There was never an instance in my mind where the city went or the agency went and requested a change of the agreement.
And we've met all conditions.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Jonathan, you mentioned the expiration of the redevelopment district, you know, that out there date.
Yep.
And there's 2 different dates, right, for
Correct.
the different districts. I guess I just want to kind of not lose a thought that, one, California got rid of their redevelopment districts and is going through an extensive wind-down process,
Agreed.
you know, legislation. And we also know that our redevelopment agency is pretty much a debtor agency right now, and the future of that needs to be discussed. And so I would want any deal with RDAs, this one, to contemplate some sort of premature expiration, whether it's this body or, enforced upon us from a higher body. So just don't know if that's in there, but would want to be protected on that.
Yeah, we'll have that in there. Yeah, if the legislature acts, we're kind of creatures of the legislature. So if they tell us it's going away and we have to defease, okay, like they did in California, that'll.
Yeah. I haven't heard it's happening. I'm just, okay.
It's a possibility, certainly.
Okay, before we move any further, Marcia came down. I just got a letter from the Pacific Coast League, letter from Branch Rickey, and I want to pass these out so it gives a little history and stuff so that you can look at them and see what they...
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This goes back to the question that Councilman Shivy asked a moment ago about the profitability. And out of all the stacks and stacks of papers that we've gotten along the way, I remember, and I don't have it in front of me, so if someone can help, there was a Forbes evaluation that was done of AAA. Is that something that maybe Mr. Alonso, are you familiar with that? Who did we get that from?
I've never seen it.
Mr. Toll is recalling something maybe.
It's on the web. You can find it on the web.
Okay. But it showed a profit, correct? Mr. Alonso, do you know, or does someone know?
Mayor, members of the City Council, Mike Alonso again for the record. There is an article in Forbes that dates back to June of this year that I believe rates the Aces as the 13th most profitable and valuable one or the other and/or AAA baseball team, with operating revenue of about $4.6 million, if I remember correctly, and it is accessible on the web, and a value of about $22 to $24 million.
Anything else you want to bring up? Yes, ma'am.
Does staff have direction, or are we going to ask them if are they asking for direction? Do they have
Yes,
that?
we're asking for direction.
Okay.
I was assuming that we've given them direction
Okay.
as we've discussed it, but
Okay.
unless there's something new that you've come up with, we can do it. Now, they furnished all of the new council, and I assume the old council, and there is a review in the back of the book showing the advantages of going through with the deal, the releases we get, and everything else. So it just shows what's happening, and that's under tab 4 in the book that they gave each one of you. And I assume they've given it to the new council, but it breaks down what the benefits are and how it works and goes from there. Well, anybody have any public comments you'd like to make at this time? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and council members. R.A. Drew, D as in David, R-E-W, Reno, Nevada. I'm very grateful that Occupy Reno notified all of its people about this meeting. I would have thought that I have zero interest in sports, but as it turns out, this is a very important issue. As a few hours of being here have proven. I have heard again and again that the issues involved are complex. Therefore, I'm concerned that we have some members of the public who want to see the council decide one way, and some members of the public who want to see the council decide another way. I'm concerned that the public doesn't have enough information to even be able to decide what they think the council should do, or to even be able to come and speak to the council and state what they want the council to know. The more the public knows about a complex issue, the better questions the public will be able to form, and the better demands the public will be able to forward to the council. I would like to see, instead of just having those in the know facing you, answering your questions, I would rather have those in the know turn around, face out here, let people raise their hands, and get a thorough grilling, as only members of the public can do. I've heard the public comments already, and your public is pretty savvy and pretty intelligent. They might come up with some questions that you haven't even thought of yet. They might come up with some questions that will lead you in different directions that you weren't thinking of going into. I'm concerned, and I think maybe the public is too. I can't speak for the public, I can speak for myself. I think the public is a little more wary now after the deal that was made with Apple. We're concerned about bailouts by any other name. We're concerned about corporate welfare by any other name. And I'd like to see us do this again, but this time turn around and ask the public to question those in the know. And I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you on this issue.
We appreciate you bringing it up and talking with us. I want to thank everybody for coming and visiting here today and listening and getting some input. Thank y'all for your presence. Do you have a question or anything? Anybody got any questions or anything you want to bring up again? Yes, sir. Fill out a speaker and you can do it.
I filled one out earlier.
All right.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. For the record, Ted Levater. This is a very complex issue. I'm not really sure where to begin. I'll start with the question of the team's profitability. I find it interesting that they're showing an operating loss of $1 million. Forbes article had them at about $5 million in revenue. The $3 million in debt service is required for the $55 million stadium, $1 million from us and $2 million from them. That's $3 million. So I see $2 million still left over after servicing the debt. So I would be very curious to find out where that $1 million operating loss comes from. In regards to the city keeping its word on this deal, as many of the other public speakers have commented, we have kept our word. I would like to make it clear that I am a big baseball fan. I grew up playing baseball. I played college baseball. I realize the impact it can have on young people. Nobody wants to see baseball leave this town. I believe in the strength and compassion of my neighbors. I'm confident we can come up with a solution that works. But the promise of this council, when this deal was originally made, was not to spend general fund dollars on this project. You made that promise to us. No. Mr. Mayor, that's on the record.
I've checked
sir.
the records and it's not on there.
Nobody
thought it would.
Yes, sir. It may not have made it to the record, but those were the comments made.
Nobody ever that I know of said we thought because of the economy and everything else, we never even looked at it. Excuse me for interrupting your time.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving on, for those of you that weren't at the November 7th meeting, Harvard University released a study in October. They published a book called Public-Private Partnerships for Major League Sports Facilities. This book is intended to help local or municipalities like ourselves structure favorable deals. My question is, has anybody in the city read this book yet? It was just published in October. It could be full of rich information to help us structure a better deal. I volunteer on behalf of our community to read this book. It costs $125. Unfortunately, I can't afford it myself. If the city would like to pay for it, I'd be happy to read it and provide a report. In terms of the ticket tax, could I get the overhead, please? Thank you. There's a little bit of confusion about exactly the ticket tax. We heard 60 cents, we heard $2. I've done my own calculation. Based on 400,000 tickets sold per year, which is still a little low from what they did last year, a $1.50 ticket tax would generate $600,000 per year. We currently owe $4 million on the fire station loan anyway. So if we were going to be paying that $400,000 that was left over out of the general fund for the next 10 years, that would be what we would have to pay anyway for the fire station loan. So a simple, flat, $1.50 ticket tax covers $600,000, and the remaining $400,000 is something we have to pay the next 10 years anyway. And one other thing that in terms of public transparency, the team has stated that they have skin in this game too, that they're going to be putting in the 1.5 or the $2 million that we're not able to come up with. I just learned recently that that money is going to come from this $2 ticket tax. So they're not putting any skin in the game. They're going to charge the consumer to pay that $2 million, and then they're asking us to dig into our bottom line to pay the $1 million. A ticket tax could be applied, and I would suggest that we can apply a ticket tax that covers that full amount. There's a lot of options open to you guys. I hope you take your time to negotiate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Once public comment has started, are we still able to go back and ask questions or advise staff?
No, you can ask questions right
I
now.
didn't wanna-
We're going for an adjournment in a minute, so you better ask your question.
The question, and he brings up a good point with regards to the ticket tax, and I know there's many immeasurable, certainly financially immeasurable things that baseball brings to the city that you can't attach a figure or a dollar amount to. But I would like staff to research a bit more the statute on the ticket tax and see exactly what all that can apply to. Can it not only be the tickets, but the retail and some of the other amenities that baseball, and what the cap is, what our flexibility is in that regard. I do think that's something we could look more closely at.
Any other comments? My favorite motion. Have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second. All in favor, say aye. Those that oppose, no. Motion carries unanimously.